Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Hyfi Preschool and Kids Weekly Training Podcast. We are in the month of March where we are talking about the truth. I am loved, God loves me, and we are so excited. My name is Crystal Mazuka, and I'm here with my good friends Isaac and Kayla. How's it going, Isaac and Kayla?
It is going great, Crystal.
Hey, Crystal, thanks for having us.
I'm so glad you guys are enjoying some beautiful, sunny, slightly chilly days in Nashville. And I am sitting here in the Pacific Northwest where it is all gray all the time. But that's okay because we get to talk about the incredible and powerful love of God this week. And so, speaking of power, I would love to ask you, my dear friends, if you could have the power to something, fill in the blank, what would you choose and why?
Ooh, this is a fun one. If you could have the power to do something, what would it be? I Food is my love language. I know I
Mm-hmm.
said a couple weeks ago that it was quality time. Food is right there up there with quality time. Like they're neck and neck.
The sixth
Give
love
me some
language
quality time with
with
food.
Oh my
food.
Like,
goodness.
oh man, it's Kayla's best day ever. So I would say if there was something I could do, have the power to do, it would be to eat all the things that I love and enjoy. And somehow my body magically turns that into healthiness and the right
Mm.
amount of calories, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gaining weight, and it's so good for my body. And milkshakes are like eating salad. I
Oh
think
my
that would be great.
goodness.
You know what? I think that we have a lot of listeners that are nodding their head of like, I hadn't thought of that one, but let me like put me down for that. That's good. What about you, Isaac?
So I love to always like try to learn how to do new things, and I love to be able to do new
Mm.
things, but sometimes there's that gap between like, oh, I really want to learn something and oh, I really want to do something. So if I could just like, instantly download how to suddenly play guitar, or instantly download like, oh, how to code this video game, or instantly download, oh, how to create this thing in this program. I think that would be, but instead of having to like watch hours and hours of YouTube tutorials or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
my wife would love it because then like, as we're like redoing things around the house, she would be like, oh yeah, you know how to hang up a new door and put it in a doorknob. And I didn't have to watch an hour worth of YouTube videos for that. Just instantly know things like that. So great.
I I love it. That does sound pretty wonderful. But then you're going to have all of your friends asking you to do things for them because you know how to do so much.
You
Uh,
know what? I can show love to others in that way. You know what? I could just
way to turn that around. Way to turn that around. Yeah, I know. Mine, Isaac, it's a little similar to yours, but mine would be more like I would love to be able to just be able to understand and speak every language.
oh,
Like you come across somebody and you can just automatically understand and talk to them. I got to go on a really fun vacation to Mexico a few weeks ago, and I always try and practice my Spanish, but it would always be funny because I would say just a little phrase that I remember from high school and like let's say somebody at the front desk, they hear it and they're like, "Oh, tú hablas español," and I'm like, "No, no, 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 un poquito, very little." And so I would love to be able to do that. Anyways, so but it's so funny when we talk about power. We usually think about the ability to be able to do things or make things happen. And this week we are talking about how God's love is powerful. And in Hi-Fi, we think it is really important that preschoolers and kids know that when we talk about power and God's power, this is not a superpower. This is not a superhero. He's not a superhero. It's not made up. There's nothing fantasy about it. God's love is powerful. It is unlike anything else because he is unlike anyone else. And so it's going to be really cool as we teach them about God's powerful love and that this isn't something made up. It's not something fantasy. It is very, very real. And it is something incredible that we get to experience as we have a relationship with him. So we are talking about God's power. God's love is powerful through the story of Jesus raising Lazarus in John 11. So, as we teach the story of Jesus raising Lazarus, we're not just focusing on that part of the interaction, on Jesus raising Lazarus, but we also talk about Jesus's interactions with Mary and Martha before that miracle even happens. And so, Isaac and Kayla, like, why is it important that we show the powerful love of Jesus before that miracle even happened?
Yeah, this is a really good question because we're we have the 2020 hindsight, right? We know what's about to happen. And many of the kids in our
Mm-hmm.
ministries may have heard this story before. This is one of those foundational stories. This is the most powerful miracle that Jesus performs right before he goes to the cross, right? And so I love how John's gospel shows all of these miracles that really lead up to the resurrection. And
Mm,
so we see this really powerful miracle that Jesus does, but we have the hindsight to know that it's going to happen. And so I think
mm-hmm.
sometimes because we know that, we take for granted what they were actually experiencing in that moment.
Yeah.
And to see God's love for them and to see how Jesus loved Mary and Martha and delayed, right? Like
Mm,
his delay was part of his love for them and they didn't understand it.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important as we talk with kids about God's love for them because there's so often times where we don't always understand what's going on. We
Mm-hmm.
can't always put it into words. We don't really
Mm-hmm.
understand the circumstances, but we can know and trust in who God is and his love for us in the hard times, even when we can't explain why the circumstance is happening or what God is allowing to happen in our lives. He has a plan and purpose that far exceeds our limited knowledge and understanding.
And I want to add one more thing. I think one other thing that I really love about this is that Jesus also cared about them in that moment. When we have that short verse of Jesus
Mm-hmm.
wept, he cared about them. He cared about their hurt. He cared about what they were going through. He saw the big picture. He knew what was about to happen, but he also recognized that even though he had this big plan, he was following God's plan, there were still going to be moments in their lives where they were hurting, where they were grieving, and he was right there beside them with him during that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Isaac, that leads perfectly into kind of what I wanted to ask you next. Like we want kids to just totally know and understand that God's love is powerful. There is nothing like it, and they can trust it and rely on it. But it's not always easy when we don't see it the way that we want to see it. We want to, when we pray, but we're not seeing the answer to the prayer the way that we were hoping or we were wanting, or it feels like it's taking a long time. So can you guys speak into a little bit of like what can it look like for us to help kids trust God's powerful love even when he doesn't answer prayers the way that we were hoping he would?
Yeah. I feel like a lot of kids leaders, preschool leaders, even like student leaders can definitely relate to this question that kids have asked of,
Mm-hmm.
how can God love me if ... has happened? How can God actually love me if I'm going through this? And that can be such a hard question. I know that I've been asked because you empathize with those kids. You want to love those kids. You care for those kids, and your heart hurts for them because you know that they are going through such tough times. They're having things that are happening in their lives that are out of your control, that are out of their control, that are just hard. So we want to care for these kids. We want to love these kids. We want to pray for these kids as they're going through these hard times. And one thing that I think we can always point to is, hey, God has loved you. He's cared for you. These are the things he's brought you through that when we look back, we can say, hey, this is how God was powerful in this moment. This is why a personal testimony, and for us as leaders to have that personal testimony ready is so important, because we can point back
Mm-hmm.
to moments in our lives, moments that we've gone through where God's powerful love was happening. And then we can share with these kids, hey, this is what I've experienced. Here are some maybe smaller things that I know you have experienced. If we know these kids well and as we built relationships with them, these are things that you've experienced. So now you can trust that God is here with you. He has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. And we can trust and pray that his powerful love is going to do something that we may not understand. It might not be the great thing that we're praying for, that we are hoping for, but we know that God's power is going to work through it.
That's so great, Isaac. And Kayla, if you don't mind me asking, I would love for you to kind of respond to something that Isaac started to share about. So this idea of leaders getting to sort of share their own experiences of seeing the powerful love of God. Um, how we talk a lot with Hi-Fi about these flip relationships, right? Like helping kids build relationships with friends, leaders, influencers, and pastors. So this is a really cool opportunity, I think, to be able to help that leader relationship when it comes to flip. So would you speak a little bit about that? Like why is that important? And how specifically can talking about these stories help to cultivate that relationship?
Yeah, it's really important, right? I think we know that as leaders, like it matters what we share with kids, and it matters that they not only see us teaching the Bible, but they see us living that out. So, and I think it matters in a couple of ways. I think one way that it matters is it builds vulnerability and authenticity. And so it's important to share those things in age appropriate ways,
Hmm.
right? And so it's important to, be mindful of what you're sharing and how you're sharing, be age appropriate, but be authentic in how you see God showing up in your life and the experiences that you've had. The other way I think it really matters is because it helps ground kids in reality versus feeling. What I mean by
Mm,
that is this culture, kids are inundated with this idea of emotional reasoning versus logical reasoning.
hmm.
So they are more in tune to say, this is what I feel, therefore, this is what is true, instead of finding something that they can take logical understanding and experience of, this is what is rooted in reality, therefore
Hmm.
this is what is true, and drawing conclusions from it. And so often when we talk about love in particular, that's what I feel, right? And
Mm,
so as long as I feel loved, then I'm loved. But if the moment that I don't feel loved, or I don't feel like giving love, then
hmm.
that changes. So I think when leaders ground their their experience of who God is in reality, and in this is how God showed up. This is an actual example of something God did, of how I saw him move, of how I saw him work. Then it changes that feeling mentality, that emotional reasoning, towards a logical reasoning and understanding that
Hmm.
grounds kids in truth instead of grounding them in their feelings. So I think it helps in that aspect, and it also helps with building relationships, building vulnerability and authenticity, so that kids are able to see, hey, I'm not just this perfect teacher. I'm a real person too, and I'm able to
Hmm.
share in age appropriate ways the ways that God is moving and working in my life. And so you're able to share those journey moments with kids, that it's not just a one and done, it's a
Hmm.
continual journey with the Lord.
I love that. This Bible story is such a cool one. I actually remember years ago seeing like it was some kind of Easter play, but it was at an outdoor amphitheater. And again, Washington, like I'm in Western Washington, it's beautiful. It was gorgeous. And I remember this portion of it, like that moment where Jesus tells Lazarus to come out of the tomb, and I think it's great because we want kids to know like this is something that really happened. Like this is a fact that could be in any history book like this. Like there were these people, Jesus really had this encounter. This guy really was dead. and that he came back to life, which of course we know it's going to be really exciting. It's setting some stuff up for Easter and everything. But we don't just want them to know that it's a fact of something that really happened. We also want them to know that this love of God that is so powerful transforms their identity. So how would you say that God's love, like a true understanding of God's powerful love, could transform the identity of a child?
I really love that identity transformation comes from God. It
Mm,
starts with God, it ends
mm-hmm,
with God. Everything about it is through God. And so it just takes me to Ephesians where we talk about, like we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus. And the only reason that's happened is because it is a gift from God. And when we see the transformation that God does in us and God does through us,
mm-hmm,
we're able to really see the tangible ways that God changes us. And I think that's so important as we live out our faith and as we train kids to live out their faith, that it's not just a verbal assent of belief. It is that, it is believing in Jesus and trusting in Jesus, but there is also a surrender of our lives that happens in that moment and that transformation that only God can do. And I think, for the kid who maybe has had a church background or has grown up in church, it's easy to think for them, my story's not that much different. My story doesn't matter that much because I'm
mm-hmm.
not doing that much different than when I was a good person and didn't smack my brother across the face before. And now I trust in Jesus and I don't do that now either. But I think it's really important to help really root kids in their identity, that it's
Mm-hmm.
not what they do, it is who God says they are. Because so often we want to work out our salvation, right? We want it to be, okay, let me do these things and God will be pleased with me. But we have
Mm-hmm.
to keep coming back to the gospel that it is God who does this work in us and through us. And it is only because of his transformation that we even want to love and obey and follow him.
That was so well said, Kayla. I love that. And man, what an incredible opportunity we have this week to help kids. Some of them hear it for the first time, other times hear it for the 50th time. Some kids might make a decision this week to say, yes, like I want that. Like I want to be transformed by the love of God, which is just really cool. So listeners, we are so excited. We cannot wait for you to get to share this powerful story. And then, of course, we know that this is the beginning of one of our favorite times in the church. Next Sunday is what is traditionally called Palm Sunday, and we will be looking at that story of Jesus entering Jerusalem and the celebration that happens there as we talk about how God's love gives us hope. And then, of course, our fifth Sunday is Easter this year, and we are talking about how Jesus is alive. And I mean, hooray! Jesus is alive, and as well, Jesus changes the game. So let us know in our Facebook group, drop it in the chat how things are going. If you've done Exploration Easter yet, we would love to see your pictures, share your stories with us. And in the meantime, we will be praying for you and looking forward to connecting with you next week here on the podcast.